Believe it or not, walking is the ideal exercise for burning belly fat way faster than running could ever accomplish in its wildest dreams. In this video, I'm going to share with you five walking hacks that I've invented myself that will target that pesky, stubborn ass belly fat. So let's get right into it. The first walking hack that is going to be guaranteed to give you long-term sustainable fat loss is going to be making a commitment to walking throughout the day. So opting for shorter walks as opposed to 1 to 2 long walks either every day or every couple of days. So before we talk about the benefits of short walking over long walking, I want to address the elephant in the room, and that is why walking in general is superior to running when it comes to long-term sustainable fat loss, especially the type of fat loss that allows you to burn off that belly fat once and for all and keep it off. Running, unfortunately, is going to be, while it's good for burning calories super fast, it's not sustainable, and it's not a long-term strategy for fat loss. If anything, running is a fine cardiovascular exercise. It's a fine form of aerobic exercise used for maintaining your VO2 max, which is going to be the maximum amount of oxygen that cycles through your cardiorespiratory system, and it makes it available for basic vital functions like respiration. But ultimately, it's not going to be beneficial for fat loss because as a high intensity form of cardio, it's going to target fat loss and muscle loss. So you're going to be losing a lot of weight. And as we know, weight is far more than just fat and water, but it's also comprised of muscle. One of the reasons why runners are in the very beginning going to be considerably smaller and emaciated versus people who either just stick to weight training or people who do a combination of weight training and walking. So running is not going to be in the long term advantageous for fat loss. Another reason why running is probably not what you need to do if your goal is to burn off belly fat is that running is going to target and ultimately increase cortisol, which is your stress hormone, and ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. As a high intensity form of cardio, unfortunately, running is going to stress you out. It's going to increase stress, oxidative stress in particular, inside of your cells, and it's also going to spike your hunger hormone. It's going to make you hungrier. So the more you run, the hungrier you get. You're going to have a need to unfortunately consume way more calories, and oftentimes it's going to induce you to start eating in a calorie surplus, aka you're going to gain fat over the long term if you are an avid periodic runner. So that is the main reason for why we want to be using walking, not running, for fat loss. So now we can talk about those hacks. The first hack, as I mentioned at the start, is going to be short walks over long walks because we need a sustainable strategy for long-term fat loss. Belly fat, unfortunately, is probably going to be the last place where fat is going to leave your body. It's going to be quite justifiably, it's known as stubborn belly fat. Belly fat itself isn't stubborn. Your habits are stubborn, right? People aren't patient enough to stick to a calorie deficit long enough to get down to below 12% body fat, which is typically where you start to see that lower abdominal fat finally start to come off your body, finally start to melt away. So, in order for us to be targeting and ultimately doing long-term fat loss, we want to be doing short walks that are dispersed throughout your day. What am I doing right now? I'm going on a short walk. How am I carrying out that short walk? by aligning it with something I do on a daily basis, which is recording these daily walk and talks. Similarly, if you take a lot of conference calls for work, instead of sitting on your booty and doing each of those calls seated down at a office desk or inside of a cubicle, go for a walk inside one of the corridors at your office. Or if you're a hybrid worker, some days of the week you work from home, you don't have to turn on your webcam. Just keep it off, walk around, do that meeting. That 30-minute meeting or that 60-minute meeting easily translates to 3,000 to up to 6,000 steps. So if you decide to prioritize short walks over long walks, I guarantee you'll not only rack out more steps, but all that walking that you do is ultimately not going to spike your stress hormone, and it's not going to spike your hunger hormones. It's going to keep your satiety levels at baseline. It's not going to stress you out, and ultimately it's going to allow you to maintain your calorie deficit without having to resort to slash more calories in order to lose fat. So that's going to be the first hack. Short walks over long walks. Let's now talk about the second hack for burning belly fat a lot faster than running. That's going to be all about how fast you walk. And this is going to be the trick here. You don't want to be walking fast at all. In fact, you want to avoid any situations where you essentially break into a jog, a sprint, or worst of all, you break into a run. You start sprinting, you start running like the wind. You don't want to be running, you don't want to be increasing your speed when it comes to movement. You want to keep your walking speed between 2 to 2.5 miles per hour. How do you track your walking speed? Well, if you have Apple Health on your phone, that tells you your average walking speed throughout the day. Or you can just walk at a normal pace, like I am, for example. Don't bring up your heart rate, don't increase your respirations, but instead just walk at a normal, leisurely pace throughout the day. Once again, prioritizing short walks that are aligned with each of your day-to-day activities, instead of going out of your way to go for long ass hikes or long ass excursions outside or even indoors. Again, the reason for short walks and short slow walks is because we do not want to increase our cortisol, we don't want to increase our ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, and we want to keep our leptin, aka our satiety hormone, as level as possible. The last thing we want to do is make ourselves more tired, more stressed out, and hungrier, because that's going to ultimately cause us to start eating, pigging out, and ultimately start go down the rabbit hole, unfortunately, of eating in a calorie surplus. One of the reasons why people cannot keep the weight down and ultimately sustain a calorie deficit long enough to burn belly fat is because they give in far too often to food cravings and food noise. And guess what? That food noise and food cravings has a lot to do with their normal baseline levels of cortisol and ghrelin. There's a colleague of mine at work who, when I met him, he's still currently on the management team with me at work. And he was a runner. He used to run every single morning, get up pretty early in the morning, 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. And before anything else, before his first meal of the day, he would just go out for a run. And he thought this was a guy who was like in the military and everything, super fit. But in recent years, of course, he became a manager. And suddenly he had to resort to doing a lot of meetings seated down, lots of meetings where he has to kind of sit down and not only do meetings, but also do a lot of work sessions where he's doing a lot of admin, HR related work. As a result, he started to pack on the pounds. He would, of course, spend hours and hours in the office. So he would go to the vending machines, go to the fridge, pick whatever came across him immediately, and he just started engorging, right? Packing on those calories. He continued running, but what happened was a poor diet plus plenty of running every single morning was just spiking his cortisol, was making him hungrier day after day after day. And it wasn't long before this guy who was already hovering around 200 pounds easily eclipsed 400 pounds in a matter of less than a year. So in less than a year, he essentially doubled his weight. And this was a runner. This was an avid runner. This is just one example of how people who are runners but aren't necessarily disciplined in other areas of their life, namely their diet and nutrition, are going to resort to becoming overweight and even, in his case, morbidly obese very easily and very quickly. So short walks, we already talked about that, but slow walking over sprinting, jogging, and worst of all, running. So that is going to be hack number 2. Let's talk about the second hack, or the third hack. The third hack is going to be about when you decide to walk. Especially, there are a couple of occasions throughout the day where you should definitely prioritize walking. And that's going to be around mealtime. When you first start your walking journey, specifically if you're trying to become a 10,000 step a day walker, and this is going to be for all you newbies out there, you want to start by going for a 10-minute walk after each meal. So every time you have breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe your pre-workout snack, etc., I want you guys to finish eating, drink your pint of water, and then go out for a walk. At least a 10-minute walk. A 10-minute walk at a normal leisurely pace is guaranteed to give you about 1,000 steps. So if you eat 4 times a day, for example, that's quick and easy 4,000 steps just from walking after meals. That's going to be my baseline recommendation in terms of walking at mealtime. When you become more advanced and you start walking 20,000 steps plus every single day, and eventually when you cross above that threshold to 25,000, 27,000, and yes, especially when you cross 30,000 steps a day, I want you to graduate from walking after meals to graduate to walking during meals. I want you to start the habit. And in fact, this is something that no one is ever going to tell you about, and hardly anyone ever does. And that's why you probably won't see anybody in this day and age who actually averages over 32,000 steps a day. But in order to get into that elite level territory of walking, you want to get into the habit of walking at mealtime, not after meals, but during your meal. So you're eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, your pre-workout snack, and you either have a walking pad with a standing desk at home, or maybe you don't have any of that equipment. You don't necessarily need those types of gadgets available in your home, apartment, etc. And you can just walk around in your living room, in your kitchen, in your dining room area, etc. I have a studio apartment, and I have barely enough room from where I walk into the apartment to where the apartment kind of leads me to the lone bathroom in there. And there's just this small space, this living area, so to speak. And I just walk from one end of that living area to the next while I'm eating each of my meals. And I typically, when I'm eating a meal, I'm actually listening to a podcast, or I'm listening to one of my YouTube music playlists, or I'm watching a Portuguese or a Spanish TV show on my laptop or on YouTube TV, for example. So I'm always going to be pairing walking with another activity I would be doing otherwise seated down. So walking during meal times is going to give you way more than just that standard 1,000 steps you would get after meals, right? For me, whenever I walk during meals, I get anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 steps. So if I'm eating 4 times a day at the moment, that's an easy 12,000 steps right off the bat that I get. So I get 12,000 steps in addition to all the other steps that I'm racking up throughout the day with these walking windows that I've created. Basically scheduling each of my walks and aligning them directly with each of my day-to-day activities. So that is going to be hack number 3, walking while eating. Now, let's talk about the 4th hack. The 4th hack has to do with resistance training and how you're supposed to pair walking while you're carrying out your total body workout or your bro split or your push-pull legs, whatever routine you decide to follow. The key thing is, number 1, you need to go into the gym or at least opt for at-home workouts with weights, right? Not calisthenics. You need to build real muscle. How do you build muscle? By progressively overloading reps every single week and then adding on 5 to 10 pounds, typically 5 pounds every 3 to 4 weeks for isolation exercises and 10 pounds for compound exercises. Of course, if after 3 to 4 weeks you can't handle that additional weight, just add on 2.5 pounds instead. But the key thing is to always be increasing the weights that you're lifting over time. Now, for those of you that do have a gym membership, or even at home, you can actually implement this. But whenever you have to rest between a set of any one of your exercises, for example, you do 2 sets of 10 reps for a chest fly. After you're done doing that first set, instead of sitting down and waiting for the next set to begin, i.e. you set a timer on your phone for a minute and a half, instead of sitting down for that minute or minute and a half to pass by, I want you to walk around instead. Walk around your chest fly machine, walk around that bench where you're carrying out your chest fly with some free weights. 60 seconds to 65, 70 seconds, I want you to walk non-stop. For me, for someone who does total body workouts, which are comprised of about 12 exercises, which combined target all 6 muscle groups, for 12 exercises, each of which I do either 2 sets of 10 reps, 11 reps, or 12 reps, depending on the week, I'm gonna get an automatic 2,500 to 3,000 steps during that total body workout. That's 3 days a week. 3 days a week, I'm guaranteed an easy, automatic 2,500 to 3,000 steps. Now, how does this help with fat loss? Because the more muscle you build, muscle is going to be ultimately thermogenic, and it's going to increase your metabolic rate or your BMR. So you increase your metabolism, your body decides to hold on to more muscle and burn fat instead for energy. Second, you're adding more steps. You're increasing your activity level, and you're increasing your activity level at the same time as building muscle in the gym or during your at-home total body or your resistance training workouts. So ultimately, by increasing your activity and increasing your metabolic rate, you're also contributing indirectly to long-term fat loss. The type of long-term fat loss which is ultimately going to allow you to burn off that belly fat and allow you to reach 12% body fat or below. If you only go to the gym and build muscle, but you are still averaging 10,000 steps or less every single day, it's going to take you that much longer to reach 12% body fat, and you're going to reach those fat loss plateaus, aka metabolic adaptation, a lot sooner every single month. And as a result of that, you're going to force yourself to cut more calories from your diet. When you decide to cut calories at the expense of increasing activity level, guess what happens? You're going to start losing muscle in addition to losing the fat. So by the time you finish your cut or you finish your calorie deficit, you're going to unfortunately look a lot smaller and a lot thinner than ever before, instead of maintaining as much muscle as possible so that you retain that lean, athletic physique. So that is going to be hack number 4. The fourth walking hack for burning belly fat a lot faster than running. The last hack, and this is definitely something that no one talks about, let alone does on a daily basis, and that's minimizing, actively, intentionally minimizing the amount of time you spend sitting all day. And that is, if you ever find yourself sitting for more than 30 minutes at a time, I want you to immediately stand up and walk non-stop for 10 minutes. This essentially means, if my math is correct, that every 30 minutes, if you're walking 10 minutes, then on average every hour, you should be racking up at least 2,000 steps. And if you're awake for at least 16 hours in a day, that is a guaranteed 32,000 steps a day. I hope now you're understanding why I always shoot for at least 32,000 steps a day, right? Because I'm on average walking 2,000 steps every single hour. I'm trying to stay as active as possible and decrease the time I spend sedentary, and ultimately increasing my risk for metabolic syndrome disorders like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, all of which you expose yourself to the longer you sit every single day. By walking 32,000 steps a day, that means I'm walking essentially 5 or more hours a day. So I'm barely sitting down at that point. In fact, when I'm not walking, I would much rather stand than sit down. I only sit down maybe on occasion a couple of times a day. The rest of the time, if I'm not standing, you better believe I'm going to be walking around, racking up as many steps as I can. 32,000 and counting. Just walk, baby.